going here, babies. Wow. It's cloudy out there this morning. A little hazy. Not storm clouds, just hazy clouds. The kind you get after they chemtrail a bunch. Man. They must have been busy last night out there in that sky. Darn. But got the makings of a beautiful day just the same. We're all beginning to wake up and see things much differently than we ever did before. Oh my. And we're about to take off and fly here on this planet Earth. Now, I know to many of you it don't seem like that, you know, goodness. It's, oh, by the way, this is Grandpa Peter Koyote coming to you from Crestone, Colorado in the United States of America on the planet called Mother Earth, where we're here to give ourselves and our mother a rebirth. Yeah. Life is a rockin' place to be. I know many of you don't get much enjoyment out of it. It seems like sometimes it's nearly impossible. The good things always seem just a little out of reach. You can taste, you can get a moment, but then it releases itself and it's gone away and you're on down the road still doing what you do. Well, that's just trucking. Got to learn to enjoy it while it's there. And this is what helps it increase. So that one day, we step into that paradise to experience it again, and it never goes away. We have our ecstasy. We have our love. We have everything we need. It's been the deepest desire of mankind, humankind, since we began this place in the first place. To get back to that place in the heart where you can experience your ultimate truth in every moment that you live. And God, we done some living, ain't we, kids? So I'm here to tell you one of my trucking tales this morning because there's a lot of metaphorical meaning in it. Inside that, it's fun. Now most of you know, not all of you, that, you know, I've been a trucker off and on for a good share of my life. I did retire when I was 42 and stayed off the road for 13 years. I did some other interesting things while I was at it. And even when I was trucking full time, I'd do it for a few years and then go off and do something else for a while. But I always wound up traveling. Because traveling is just the way it should be, you know. You're sitting in one place for too long, you tend to stagnate, you know. You get out there and you share yourself with this earth, and this earth shares herself with you in all of its many forms, people and places, etc. And it makes life richer, you know. I guess it's what you'd call a poor man's way of being a professional tourist, you know. A visitor on this planet that gets to go here and go there and occasionally experience a little different side of life. It used to be really wild back in the 70s when things were really opening up in this country, and everybody liked to party, and everybody was looking for that something, that little moment of paradise. We knew the old rules didn't stick. They were, well, bullshit. And we were challenging them all, you know, because we'd disproven the few. We figured if it was the few, it was the many, and, you know, we might as well throw them all out the window. Let's have some fun with this. Let's party, you know. So life was a party from one end of this country to the other, you know. And if there wasn't one happening wherever you went and you had some time to do it, you could get one going. It was an awesome time to be alive, and people were open and playful. I mean, not everybody, of course, and there were a lot of dour, sour folks around and folks that couldn't pull their head out if they had to, but in general, there was just a whole big bunch of us out here that thought life was a party and was meant to be enjoyed, and we didn't think it had to be the daily grind that our forefathers and mothers had put up with, and, you know, that rigid world where everything is narrow and, you know, absolutely defined, and you just went with the flow no matter what you felt inside, you know, you couldn't resist. I hate to say it, but in some ways it's like the Nazis won World War II, because, you know, life became real rigid here shortly thereafter, but there was a whole generation of beings born into that next generation after the war, the baby boomers, that were souls of a different sort, of a different nature, that really were born seeking the light. And they knew they'd come from it, and they knew they'd come back to it. These were more gentle souls, souls that didn't want to see war again, you know, because they'd just come from it. It was a great recycling. All those millions of people that died in that war come back as these enlightened baby boomers all over the earth. I just got to experience it here in America, but, you know, it was happening everywhere. It was awesome, awesome times, man. But these times we're in now, far more powerful. It doesn't feel near as free. It feels like we're trying to go back to some form of that rigidity, you know. Hell, it'll never happen. People won't tolerate it. We just can't do it. It's not in our DNA anymore, you know. It's been taken away. We partied it out of there back in the 70s. But anyway, with that said, let me take you back into those 70s. Now, you know, I was born a trucker. I was born because of a truck. Back in the 40s sometime, my parents, who were truckers, farmers, ranchers, community people, church people, they decided it was time to get a new truck for the coal haul. My great-grandfather had started the coal hauling business, and coal was used to heat houses then. You know, I know we all, you know, use natural gas and things and electricity nowadays, but coal was the thing then, and it went to everybody's houses. So in the winter, that's how the farm supported itself. We hauled coal to people's houses, and my great-grandfather started that business by hauling vegetables over the mountain in his buckboard and then bringing back a load of coal. And he hauled those vegetables over there to sell them, but of course the mining companies were so cruel that they'd have mine disasters and men would be killed, many of them. And a month later, they would put the widows out on the street because everybody lived in what they called company housing in company towns and bought their food from company stores. The company was the be-all, do-all, you know, and you lived at its request, and if you died in its service, well, too bad for your family. And out they go the next month, because there's nobody there to make the rent payment anymore. Nobody there to mine the coal. So, over in this town called Helper, little town in Utah, on the Price River, there were tent cities along the rivers of widows and orphans, living in bitter, bitter-ass cold weather. So, of course, my great-grandfather, having a soft heart kind of like me, it's part of what I inherited from that dude, let me tell you, but he just couldn't stand it. He'd give those vegetables to those starving people, because they're, I mean, you know, it's worse than being homeless these days. There wasn't much for these people. They were neglected and ignored in a very big way. So he would share the vegetables with them, just give them away. And I'm sure it put a dent in his old pocketbook and in the support of his own family, but he was willing to do this. because he'd make a little bit of money on the coal coming back. So he went and get his load of coal and head back over the mountain. Of course, this trip took about 3 days each way, something we did in a few hours when I was a kid. But that's where my family's coal business started, trucking over those mountains. And of course, I was born right into it. My daddy, had assumed the business of his grandfather. And there was need a new truck. The old ones were wore out, and there was a need for a new truck. So him and Mama decided they would have a little fun. They'd buy a new truck, and they would go back to the factory to pick it up and travel cross country and, see a little bigger slice of the turf, enjoy themselves, party in their own way. About all they could get away with in those days. So they went back to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and picked up a new International tractor and truck tractor, and brought that back to Utah. And along the way, they visited some cities and partied down and stuff. But, they wound up getting lost in a snowstorm in the Rocky Mountains, and a hitchhiker showed up out of nowhere, and as they picked him up, of course, guided him back out of the mountains. And they went back down to Boulder to stay the night and wait the storm out and truck it over. That's the wise thing to do, by the way. When it's storming on the mountain, wait down below, Don't go up there and tackle it, just because it can be pretty hostile up there. So anyway, that's what they wound up doing. And in the process, they conceived the presence of the little child within my mama's belly. And that little child was me. So see, I was almost born with a gear shift in my hand. And as I was growing up on the farm, I was the driving dude. I drove everything. I started driving when I was 5, tractors in the field, pulling wagons with people throwing shucks of grain up onto them. And I could barely hold the dang clutch down, let alone release it. It was difficult. But that's where I started. And got to driving the bigger trucks when I was about 7. I got a little size to me, so I could do that. And of course, as life went on, and in later years, after I'd had a great time being a hippie for a while, but was, needing to provide for my family, it was the natural thing for me to do, get into long-haul trucking. So that's what I did. And one of the early on jobs I had was hauling steel on flatbed trailers between Utah and California, paid a nickel a mile. We thought we was just making money hand over fist, $250 a week if I ran my ass off, Of course, things were a lot cheaper then, too. It wasn't so expensive to live. But it was on one of those trips. Wound up over there in Reno. And, actually Verdi, which is a little town next to Reno, and a place called, nowadays it's called Boomtown. Back then it was Bill and Effie's truck stop. 49-cent ham and eggs all the time, and 10-cent cup of coffee, and it was great coffee too. But there was a casino there, very small, but, that's where you went when the hill, Donner Summit, was all snowed in up there. That's where you went to wait with Verdi. There'd be trucks parked everywhere, and the place would be packed with people and passing the time away, waiting for the highway to open. Well, we were there for when I say we, me and a bunch of other truckers, we're there for 3 days. The storm was really in, and it wasn't letting up, and there wasn't no going over the mountain. And we needed to get this steel to California. And of course there were some hippie kids hanging around and needing a ride to California. What the heck, I'll take this young couple with me and they'll help me keep awake, and we'll get this sucker over the mountain. But we ain't going over Donner's. Now, we'd heard the Feather River route, which is a little north of there. and a little lower elevation, but you know, it's all two-lane twisty turny highway. It's a slow old drive. But we'd heard that it was just raining up there, and so we thought we could safely make it through. So me and 3 other truckers kind of convoyed up that way, took these hippies along with us. And because I knew it was going to be a long night, I did something I hardly ever do. And then hardly ever, now never. But then these kids had some speed with them, little cross tops, you know. So I popped a couple of those to keep my eyeballs propped open, you know, because I knew I needed to be alert that night, you know. And oh man, we started up there. This is a beautiful canyon. You can't see much of it at night, and this was at night. But it's an awesome canyon, man. Feather River Canyon. Oh, if you ever get the opportunity, take a little drive through there. Quincy, California is one of the towns on the route. But take a little drive through there, man. It's awesome country. Ah, beautiful. But that night, it proved itself to be pretty spectacular. We got over there, and it's raining all right. You know, we did drive out of the snows. We got down towards Quincy. It's, you know, you're not going very fast anyway, but man, it's raining buckets. I mean, it's a solid, steady stream on your windshield, you know. And the mountains are starting to slide, and, you know, there's about an inch of water on the road constantly. And it really makes it for tricky driving, you know. So my partners all went on ahead of me because I wasn't going fast on this stuff, and they wanted to get down the hill. But I'm going like 20 miles an hour, and they're going like 30, 35, you know. But we get down into that canyon. Now, the Feather River Canyon's huge. And the river that night, over 200 feet deep. Man, it was just, you can't imagine the runoff off these huge mountains. All coming down into that river all at once, and it just became engorged. And it was up within inches of the roadway in places and lapping over it in other places. And this is such a steep and deep river that you can feel the thunder of it coming right up through the seat of the truck you're driving. It's an incredibly eerie feeling, especially when you're a little bit wired. My goodness. So me and these kids just taking it easy, but there's a lot of silence in that truck. You feel about as big as a flea when stuff is going on like that, because you know, one false move and you're down in that raging river in this big old truck that's going to get beat to pieces, and you along with it. I mean, you ain't going to last 3 seconds in that water. And it's treacherous. Lots of hairpin turns and stuff. Couple places going down that canyon where the slides had come down and they'd got the caterpillars out and kind of flattened them out where the road was supposed to be, and you could drive over that and get on your way. And if you got stuck out there in the slide, the caterpillar would come up behind you and give you a push and get you out of there, you know. But it was a night I'll always remember. It was one of the craziest nights I ever experienced. To really witness the power of nature with such forcefulness and live to tell about it. Because that's when you know your life is very, very fragile. Now, I freely admit that now when I was a young buck, I was out there seeking adventures like this, you know. I thought going through disasters would be an exciting thing. I didn't want to see people get hurt, myself included, nobody. But there was something in me that just loved the power of nature. And wow. As a consequence, I've been through just about every natural disaster known to man and a few unnatural ones, I know. And these days, what I want to adventure is the higher realms, the deeper places inside yourself. the journey through the cosmos, the real experience of life, the grounded, earthy one, has its merits. And it's a beautiful place to experience and to learn to feel again. But man, when you're sitting there and a volcano goes off, and you feel the explosion and feel the earth start to liquefy beneath your feet, you feel small. You don't exactly feel powerless, but you feel small. And yeah, you've been programmed to feel powerless. Like this is just something you can't help but go through. You have no control. It's nature at her meanest. And of course, in my younger days, as I went through these things, that's what I experienced, was the powerlessness, the fear. But it's not really fear, it's just a smallness. You feel like a flea on a camel's back. But they're just really, the power of nature is phenomenal. Even in the weather. Hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, they're incredible. Snowstorms. Oh. Had a lot of good times because of it. Got into a lot of good parties. It was good that way. Waiting out snowstorms can be more fun than a barrel of monkeys, man. At least in those days it could. Man. But you get to another place in your life as you go along, and you're pretty full of adventure. I would like to just take it easy for a while and cruise a bit, you know. You get to this place where you begin to experience another aspect of yourself. You begin that journey within. You begin to understand, because part of traveling opens you up, and you have to, I mean, especially if you're of my generation, you have to explore the spiritual dynamic. And as you do, you begin to realize small bits of empowerment. And see that you can wish storms away. And enhance your own protection in these moments of natural disaster. And the protection of others too. You learn to move energies. You learn to talk to clouds and tornadoes and direct them. Say, hey, you don't want to be here, you want to be over there. You're not going to hurt anybody over there. You know. You start to see one small aspect of your creative ability. And you begin to realize something that's so profound that when this realization comes to fullness, it's going to knock your socks off. We're here to experience the powerlessness and to realize our empowerment because of it. You will see this opposite effect throughout your life in just every form and format, but that's what it's all about. You choose the most powerless place in order to motivate yourself into returning to your power. The power of love, of course, because that's the only power there is. Other people seek it in other ways, from the assumption that they have no power, then they must gain and collect it and lord it over on others, not understanding that it begins and ends within yourself. Now hang on a minute, I got to go take care of some business here. And I'll be right back with a part 2.